Welcome to Infidelity Nest. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It truly helps us keep sharing stories that touch the heart and uncover the truths hidden in quiet corners of life. Today, I'm opening up about something I never thought I'd have the courage to speak of. My name is Lisa. I'm 45 years old, and this story isn't easy to tell. If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd one day sit in front of a camera and talk about the night that changed everything I believed about love, trust, and family, I would have laughed and said, "Not me, but life has a strange way of testing us. It puts us face to face with moments that tear through the fabric of everything we thought was safe. It forces us to see people not as we imagined them, but as they truly are. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't the moment itself. It's who we become after it." This is not just a story about marriage. It's not simply about family. It's about what happens when love and loyalty blur into confusion. When a bond meant to protect ends up breaking something inside you that can never quite heal the same way again. 13 years ago, I married David. He was the kind of man who carried his past quietly. You could see it in his eyes, the loss, the weight of having lived through something he rarely spoke about. He'd lost his wife years before we met. When I came into his life, he was raising his son, Ethan, who was 9 years old then. When I chose David, I knew I wasn't just marrying him. I was also stepping into the role of a mother. Ethan wasn't mine by blood, but love doesn't always follow bloodlines. I remember the first time I helped him with homework, the way he looked up at me with uncertain eyes, as if trying to decide whether I was someone who would stay. I made him a silent promise that day, that no matter what, he would never feel alone again. I was there for every scraped knee, every cold, every forgotten lunchbox. I watched him grow, and with every passing year, he became a part of me in ways I didn't expect. The laughter, the small talk at dinner, the way he'd say, "Good night, Mom," without realizing how deeply those words touched me. For years, I believed we had built something real. A home filled with love, trust, and understanding. But time changes things. Children grow up, and so do the spaces between who they were and who they're becoming. By the time Ethan entered his 20s, he was no longer that shy boy I once tucked into bed. He had become thoughtful, charming, and intelligent. A young man with opinions, dreams, and a quiet confidence that drew people in. David adored his son, but often didn't understand him. Ethan was more introspective, more emotionally open. He talked to me for hours about life, about books, about the meaning of things David never really cared for. At first, I thought it was just the closeness of family, a mother and son who shared curiosity and compassion. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started small. Compliments that felt a little too personal. Glances that lingered a moment too long, words that carried an undertone I didn't know how to name. I brushed it off. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe this is what happens when a boy becomes a man. Boundaries become uncertain. But deep down, something unsettled had begun to grow. Then came the night that broke everything. David was out of town for a business trip. It was late. I remember because the clock on the kitchen wall had just struck 11 when I heard Ethan's car pull into the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home that night, but I thought nothing of it. He often dropped by unannounced to grab things or talk. We ended up sitting in the living room. The air felt heavy but familiar. We talked about his classes, his job search, his plans for the future. Then, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, something changed. He looked at me. Really looked at me, and said words I wasn't prepared to hear. Words that blurred the lines between mother and son. Words that shattered years of trust and redefined every memory we'd built. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed smaller, the air thinner. I felt an ache rise in my chest, the kind that comes when your world suddenly turns inside out. I told him to stop. I told him he was confused, that what he was feeling wasn't real. That he was my stepson, and I loved him as a mother does, not as anything else. He looked ashamed, and in that shame, I saw the boy I had once comforted, the child who had once held my hand, but that image was gone. The innocence of our bond had been replaced by something neither of us could undo. That night replayed in my mind for weeks. I'd close my eyes, and the words would echo again and again. The next morning, the house felt colder. We didn't speak about it. We couldn't. Silence became our language. Every step he took down the hall, every door that closed between us, reminded me that the family I thought I had built was no longer whole. David came home 2 days later, smiling, telling stories about his trip, about the friends he'd seen. I smiled too, but my heart wasn't in it. I cooked dinner, laughed at his jokes, asked questions, but it was all a performance. Inside, I was falling apart. I started to question myself. Had I done something wrong? Had I blurred the line by being too nurturing, too open, too present? Or was this something entirely out of my control? A storm that had been forming quietly in Ethan's heart without my knowing. The guilt was unbearable. I felt betrayed and responsible at the same time. Every memory, every birthday candle, every bedtime story suddenly felt poisoned, and I couldn't tell David. How could I? How could I possibly explain that the son he trusted me with had crossed a boundary that destroyed everything we once shared? Weeks turned into months. The house grew tense, like glass that could shatter with a single word. Ethan avoided me, and I avoided him. But avoidance doesn't erase pain. It only hides it. Every glimpse of him was a reminder of what had been said, what couldn't be unsaid. Our dinners became quiet rituals. David spoke. I nodded. Ethan kept his head down. Laughter had disappeared from our home. It was as though the walls themselves had absorbed the heaviness. I began spending more time alone. In the garden, in the library, anywhere but inside that suffocating silence. I'd look at old photos sometimes, the ones where Ethan was still small enough to sit on my lap, smiling, carefree, and I'd ask myself, when did that change? Was it one moment, or a series of small moments that led us here? Months later, I found Ethan's letter. It was tucked inside a book I had lent him, one of his favorites. The letter wasn't long, but it broke something inside me that hadn't already been broken. He apologized, said he never meant to hurt me, that he didn't understand what was happening inside him. He said he'd move out, give me space, and that one day he hoped I could forgive him. Reading those words was both relief and heartbreak. Relief, because I finally knew he understood the gravity of what had happened. Heartbreak, because it meant the boy I once loved as my own was gone for good. Ethan moved out soon after. David thought it was because he'd found work in another city. I didn't correct him. I let that lie live between us because the truth would have destroyed him. And maybe it would have destroyed me too. Years have passed since that night. David and I are still together. Though not quite the same. The cracks are still there, small and silent, but visible if you look closely enough. We talk about everything, except the one thing that changed us forever. Ethan visits occasionally during holidays. We're polite, distant. Our conversations are careful, rehearsed. But sometimes when I catch his eyes across the room, I see a quiet understanding there. A shared grief for the family we lost without ever truly saying goodbye. Time hasn't erased what happened, but it's softened the sharpest edges. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the ache, learning to carry it without letting it define you. For a long time, I blamed myself. But healing began the day I stopped asking why and started asking how. How do I move forward? How do I rebuild trust in myself? How do I love again? Not others, but myself. And slowly, painfully, I began to. Therapy helped. Writing helped. Speaking aloud the truth I had buried helped the most. It reminded me that silence protects no one. It only prolongs pain. I realized something profound. The human heart is fragile, yes, but it's also incredibly resilient. We break, we fall, but somehow, we still find the courage to stand up again. If you've ever experienced betrayal, in any form, you'll understand this. Healing doesn't come in one grand moment. It comes in fragments, in the way you start breathing a little easier one morning, in the way you smile without forcing it, in the way you remember who you were before the pain. I used to think that one night destroyed my life. Now I see it differently. It didn't destroy me. It transformed me. It made me more aware of boundaries, of silence, of the delicate balance between love and respect. It taught me that sometimes love has to take the form of distance, and that's okay. So today, as I share this story, I don't share it with bitterness. I share it with truth, because truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward peace. If you're listening to this and carrying something heavy, something unspoken, let this be your sign. Speak it. Release it. You don't have to let it define who you are. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the heart can survive almost anything, as long as it still believes in healing. This isn't the story I wanted to tell, but it's the story that became mine. And in accepting it, I've